Hey guys, KlaSSiK here, and today we have the second part of my OOTP 23 tutorial series. For episode 2, I decided to go over how I set up my lineups. We'll be going over two different options here. So one is how I set my lineup at the start of the season or in preseason, and after that we'll see how I go through the season and optimize my lineup by setting the players up by their ratings and their statistics. So let's go ahead and get started here. The first thing I like to do is sort my players under lineups overview batting ratings by their eye. If you're wondering, this is just the default batting ratings view. I haven't changed anything here. And the reason I go by eye is when I set up my batting order at the start of the season and even throughout the season, I make sure my leadoff hitter is someone who's going to be able to get on base. And the I is a rating that I pay a lot of value to, and I think the game does too, because unlike avoid Ks, which is how likely a player is to hit the ball into a fly ball or a ground ball or a foul ball, the I is really how they're able to identify the type of pitch that comes their way. So whether it's a ball or a strike, and how likely they are to hit that with plate discipline. So right now I have two players with 60 rating at I, but I do have Jonathan India who's also rated 50 in avoid Ks. That means that he's going to combine the best of both worlds as opposed to Austin Hendrick. And seeing that he also has 70 stealing means that once he does get on base, he will be a threat to the opposing team. So we're going to go ahead and drop Jonathan India into our first hole as our leadoff. Next, I like to sort by contact. And the reason I do that is that without knowing anything else about statistics for these players, it will determine the likelihood of them getting the ball into play. Uh, it doesn't matter if it's a home run or a base hit or, a pop up or a fly ball. It just means that they will put the ball into play. And so in this instance, it looks like it'll be Jose Miranda. Next up, I will go for my second best power hitter or my third best contact or second best contact player. And in this instance, it just so happens to be Rafael Devers. And the reason I do that is that if the first two do go out, Rafael Devers has, or the third player in the lineup has the best chance of keeping the inning going and staying alive or scoring through a home run. After that, it's the cleanup spot. And for the cleanup, I just put the person with the most power, regardless of anything else. And this just happens to be Austin Hendrick here, who has 70 power, so he automatically fits into my cleanup spot. After that, it's really the philosophy of going with your next best hitter. Also, to keep in mind who fits what I need in the team. So let's see here. We have Raymond Laureano, who is our next best contact hitter according to the game, to his ratings. He's a right fielder. We didn't have one. Then we have Javier Baez, who's our shortstop. So, we're slowly filling in the roles by just following this. Going into the seventh hole, though, this is where I like to put my second cleanup in quotation player. This is the player who's also going to be able to cause a threat in the middle of the lineup in terms of just being a home run nuisance. And in this instance, it would be Shea Langelier, who is my catcher with 60 power. He is the next in line who has not been placed yet, so I'll go ahead and drop him in. So at this point, we only have two slots available, which are the DH and center fielder. So let's start with the center fielder. And what I like to do here is we could either continue down this contact role, so that would make it Tyler Cromer. But because center fielders tend to be very important defensively, especially for OOTP, I will most likely go into the fielding ratings and at the outfield range, as the outfield range is the greatest indicator, or normally through the different iterations of OOTP, is the best indicator of how effective your center fielder will be. In this case, we do have Christian Pache, who has an 80 outfield range, which blows Tyler Cromer's range out of the water. He is less prone to error and has a much better outfield arm. So I'll go ahead and slot Christian Pache into my center field at eighth, even though, he is relatively comparable to Tyler Cromer as a hitter. If we look here at their statistics, both 45 contact, both 50 gap power. Christian actually has better power and a better eye, although Tyler Cromer is much better at avoiding Ks and is a better base runner. Finally, that leaves us with a DH, and what I'll normally do in DH is put someone who can hit with power, and in this case, Seth Brown, because if you're a DH, you have one job, that's to hit the ball and try to score runs. You could also go with the approach of taking your best contact player, but considering that uh, here we do have Seth Brown, who has 45 contact, which is comparable to all the remaining players. He has the most power, so we're just going to go with Seth Brown. So next up, what I'll do is, which I won't do right now, is I would normally just copy over my team. I'll actually do it into the left versus left-handed pitching slots. And if you're wondering why I don't try to set my hitters up based on their abilities to how well they'll do versus opposite-handed pitching, it's because that's what this strategy section is for, in my opinion. You can see here we do prefer the left versus right matchups. And if we also go back into lineups under right-handed pitching and we go into actions, generate depth, the AI sets your team up with the better pinch hitters, pinch runners, depending on the situation and who's left over, as well as your subs here, such as your defensive subs. And the same thing can be done with your left hand versus left-handed pitching lineup. Actually, here we forgot to assign the DH role to Seth Brown, which we'll do here, and just regenerate here. And not to mention that as you progress through the season, the AI will automatically throw lineups at you before the start of the game based on your strategy. So this is why I don't really worry about it too much, and it's something that I can go ahead and edit and manipulate game per game, which is how I kind of do it if I decide to get into a more nitpicky point of the season. So, seeing as we're in my Oakland A's save here, we are now 19 games into the season. We're doing pretty well. We're first in the AL West, and that means we've generated some statistics for these players. So now I'm going to show you what I do typically throughout the season, and I'll do this maybe once a month, depending on how it goes, or depending on how well players are performing, as well as depending on injuries. So what I do is instead of sorting by batting ratings, I go into sort by batting stats 1, which again is a default view, so everyone should have it. And if you click on that, you'll see here we have the statistics for these players so far. And again, it's the same approach. What I do is instead of I'll start with the on base percentage, which is how often a player gets on base. And in this instance, although we had Jonathan India here, we have Christian Pache who has a 404 on base percentage. So what I'll do is I'll put Christian Pache into my leadoff spot. Next up, no change. I go with with the best hitter, and because Christian Pache is already in the first in the leadoff spot, the number 2 hole will be filled by Jose Miranda, who, surprise, surprise, is already there from the start of the season. Then I'll put Rafael Devers because, again, I'll put the second best hitter, in this case third, or the person who is second best at slugging, but in this instance, he's actually number 1 in slugging. Afterwards, I go back into slugging to put in my cleanup guy. Here we have Shea Langelier, who currently has 4 home runs, 11 ribbies, and a 531 slugging, which puts him second only to Rafael Devers. And so instead of being the quote unquote second cleanup in the seventh hole, I'm going to put Shea Langelier now into the fourth slot instead of Austin Hendrick. Then we're going to go back into the averages, which means that now here, oops, we go to the fifth hole. So if I just remove these guys here, next up we have Tyler Cromer. So Tyler Cromer comes in as our fifth hitter, and we're going to set him as DH because we already have Christian Pache in the center field. Next up, we have Javier Baez, who is going into the sixth hole. He was already the sixth here, as we can tell. So right now, we're seeing a lot of the players doing what they were expected to do at the start of the season and kind of following that um, that 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 line that we said. Even if we go back to just batting ratings by eye, um, you know, we saw here that Christian Pache had a 50 I and 40 avoid Ks, but he managed to find his way into the best on base percentage. That might not last, so we will need to change him out at some point if it does not last. So again, in the seventh hole, I like to go with the person most likely to be a quote unquote mini cleanup. Here, if we look, we've already placed Rafael Devers, Langelier, Seth Brown, Hendrick, Cromer, Pache, Miranda, Baez. So now we have Raymond Laureano. So if we go ahead and drop Raymond Laureano in, who is the next in slugging, he becomes our threat in the middle of that lineup. Actually, no, it's Austin Hendrick because I didn't put him in yet. So we're going to put Austin Hendrick here, who was the cleanup guy originally in our original start of the season. We're now dropping him to the seventh hole as a second mini cleanup. So he's going to be swapped with Shea Langelier. So these players are doing exactly what was expected of them, and this keeps your lineup a threat throughout the game. So once again, we're left with two slots to fill, and we're still missing a second baseman, and we're also missing, from what I can tell here, a right fielder. So let's look at our right field options. We were going to put Raymond Laureano in, and we're just going to put him in here because, again, he's not hitting that well, but he is slugging, and we do need a right fielder unless we go with Seth Brown. Did I put Seth Brown in? No, we didn't. So we're just going to go with Seth Brown here, who has a really nice average, good OBP. He's got 500 slugging. So Seth Brown adds to the threat even at the bottom of this lineup, which is really nice to see. And finally, we do need a second baseman. And as we were talking about previously, second base with the center fielder, second base has historically been a more defensive position in OOTP. Although I've heard that in this iteration, a hitter is becoming more practical. Just looking at the batting stats here, we see that Nick Allen has started less games than Jonathan India, who is currently in a slump. However, we can see that Jonathan India has a much better on base percentage, or just a better on base percentage than Nick Allen. His average isn't that great. His slugging is comparable. His OPS is comparable. And we see here that he has two stolen bases and is a, I guess, neutral, you would say, WAR player versus Nick Allen, who is a negative WAR contributor. And if we just look at the fielding stats here, we can see that Nick Allen and Jonathan India, once again, have some pretty comparable statistics, although Nick Allen does come out ahead in terms of just range and efficiency, but that might be due to him playing less innings. So what I'll do is I'll just put Jonathan India here into the ninth hole. And yeah, that's kind of how my thought process when I create my lineups. Once again, what I'll do is I'll just copy over the one lineup to the other, right? And then once I've done that, I automatically just go through here. And it's funny because so many of them are exactly the same, or just move up by one. And then what I'll do is I'll go back into versus right-handed pitching, generate the depth chart, go into left versus left-handed pitching, generate the depth chart, and I'll let the AI see what's working, and I'll play a few more games. And as I was mentioning, I'll usually, after a month or so, or depending on injuries or performances, if I see someone really slumping, I'll make changes to this lineup just to give the team a boost. And if we look at how well the team is doing so far, yes, our pitching has been fabulous and fantastic, but we're not too shabby on offense either, being the fourth in the AL for batting average, third for on base percentage, third for on base plus slugging, second for WAR, third for WOBA, fourth for hits, first in bases on ball, and we're even first in steals with 19. And again, this is 19 games into the season. So hopefully you guys can understand my thought process and how I build up my lineup. And hopefully you guys find this useful. And if you do, go ahead and leave a like on this video. If you do have some comments, some suggestions, some things you'd like to see, or some questions you might have, go ahead and leave a comment below. And for all the rest, just keep an eye out for more videos. It's easier to keep track if you hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. And I'll see you guys in the next one. So for now, take care and take it easy. Peace.